Even as a neurodivergent person myself, I have to admit that I'm not usually scanning for characters who might be autistic, have ADHD, or something to that effect when I initially watch a show or movie. That being said, given the increase in visibility that neurodivergent conditions have had as of late, I'd be lying if I said I didn't often look into certain characters who give off neurospicy vibes upon a second or third watch. Before we continue, I want to clarify for anybody watching what I mean when I use the term neurodivergent. As I've mentioned in another video, it's a term that's mostly used to describe people with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and or a learning disability, though the definition is occasionally expanded to people with things like OCD or anxiety. While I personally use the term neurodivergent, I'm usually referring to more restrictive definitions, largely because I think that the term should be applied to more lifelong differences in neurotype in the case of ADHD and autism, rather than a wide range of often temporary mental conditions. But that's a whole different video. Oh wait, I should probably explain who I am before I get into the rest of this, right? Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Hi, I'm Haley Z. I am a licensed therapist in California and somebody who also happens to have autism, ADHD, and nonverbal learning disorders. So with all that in mind, combined with my nerdy interest in this show, I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to yap about it, even if they don't really have brains that we are aware of. So let's get right into it. When it comes to the aforementioned neurodivergent conditions, they tend to be misunderstood, with autism in particular being the condition that carries the most stereotypes and assumptions with it. The reality is that these conditions do exist on a spectrum, and different neurodivergent people can present drastically differently from one to another. To some extent, I understand this confusion, as the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which delineates mental diagnoses, has moved towards a more encapsulation model of describing autism as a spectrum, rather than splitting it up into things like autism and Asperger's like it did in times past. But my hope is that by talking enough about neurodiversity on the internet, I can clear up some confusion and open your eyes to new information. So you're probably thinking, what the hell does this all have to do with Murder Drones? Murder Drones is an animated horror comedy on YouTube created by Liam Vickers and produced by Glitch Productions. The actual plot is, I'm not gonna lie, pretty confusing and hard to follow at times, at least for me, but centers around robots known as drones that inhabit a planet called Copper-9. All biological life, with the exception of dogs, who are immortal because Glitch made sure not to ruin my life with any contrary information, has been wiped out due to a galactic catastrophe. Our main character, Uzi, is one of these said drones, along with her father, Khan, and the rest of the worker drone colony on the planet. In the first episode, special drones called Disassembly drones come down ostensibly to murder the worker drones who inhabit Copper-9, hence the nickname Murder Drones. This is when we get introduced to characters V, J, and everyone's favorite N, who is probably the silliest little guy in the show, if not the world as we know it. Uzi and N meet in a chaotic way and, to make a long story short, eventually become a romantic couple later on. As the series progresses, they, along with other characters, shift their focus to working against the series' primary antagonist, the Absolute Solver, a creepy as hell AI entity that can infect other drones and fuck shit up. That's really the easiest way I can describe it. In this video, I primarily want to talk about how Uzi and N both demonstrate neurodivergent traits, but I want to make a few things clear. One, even though I'm a therapist, a licensed one, and all that good stuff, I'm by no means diagnosing these two robot babies with a full-fledged DSM-5 label. Two, I'm fully aware that we are in fact talking about robots who do not in fact have brains and who are presumably programmed to be a certain way. We have to suspend a little bit of disbelief to do this analysis, and I'm perfectly okay with that. However, since I'm apparently not the only person to see neurodivergent traits in these two characters, I figured I'd throw my 2 cents in. So let's do just that. My first impression of Uzi was that she was kind of an asshole, and my second impression was that she kind of reminded me of myself in high school and middle school to a certain extent. Since I was an angsty, undiagnosed ADHDer, I thought that perhaps Uzi might be too. One thing that really stood out to me about Uzi was how much she really didn't give two shits about schoolwork unless it's something that she finds interesting, like this gun thing. This may be indicative of task paralysis, a common feature of ADHD, which commonly hits when one is not feeling motivated to do something due to disinterest, or plenty of other reasons, but disinterest is a big one. Her teacher also discusses Uzi not fitting in, and we can see that she has quite a bit of trouble interacting with her peers even when they're nice to her. This, while not necessarily a dead ringer for neurodivergence, is an all too common experience of neurodivergent kids in school. Research has found that social difficulties such as friend retention and acting in socially unacceptable ways are common for children with ADHD and autism. This isn't to say that there is always something actually wrong with the neurodivergent kid and what they're doing, but rather that because we conceptualize things and often behave differently, this can lead to people misunderstanding us and therefore disconnecting from us. Uzi is also a very blunt person who happens to have difficulty with emotional regulation quite frequently. Again, these aren't necessarily traits exclusive to neurodivergence, but we often do see autistic people being more straightforward, and what you see is what you get in their communication approach. We similarly see ADHDers struggle with emotional regulation due to having, in short, an overactive amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, and an underactive prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making center of the brain. As the relationship between Uzi and N develops, we see that he essentially becomes the closest thing to Uzi's comfort person. The idea of having a comfort person is more of an anecdotal thing I've heard from many autistic folks, though I'm apt to believe that it's common amongst the broader autistic community, as many autistic people like routine and reliability. And what's better than a reliable human you can lean on when times get tough? I've also seen people cite other reasons, like the way Uzi sits in one episode and her love for anime being a special interest being what a lot of neurodivergent people have. So overall, what do I think about Uzi? While I certainly buy her having the robot equivalent of either ADHD, autism, or both, I also feel like some of Uzi's behaviors are the natural result of being exposed to extreme trauma from the time she was probably born. I mean, we're talking about a girl who lost her mother at a young age and then got publicly blasted by her dad, who, by the way, also backed away from her as she was literally about to die. And while it would take a whole other video to explain the differences between trauma responses and being neurodivergent, they do share some similarities. In conclusion, to give the most therapist-y answer possible, I can't say what she has unless it's either confirmed to be canon or I get to evaluate her myself, one of which is more likely than the other. But hey, if you relate to her as a neurodivergent person, that's cool and that is awesome. So what about N? First of all, I'm going to give the most basic ass initial assessment of him and say that he is absolutely adorable. Like, so cute. And when he talked about the golden retrievers having gentle mouths, I was freaking out. I was like, oh my god, that's why my golden retriever nephew is so cute and soft and gentle, and I just love him and I love the baby so much. But in terms of neurodivergence, the biggest argument I've seen for N being autistic is his difficulty in social situations, which, again, can be a struggle for both autistic and ADHD people, and often is. This is evident from the beginning of the show when he first meets Uzi, letting her know that everybody thinks he is useless and terrible, in quotes, followed by him saying that he's not supposed to tell Uzi that. And he later tells Uzi about V and J, his co-workers, I guess if we can call them that, giving her the assessment of them that is wildly contradictory to his actual interactions with these two deadly ladies. However, he later is able to briefly confront Jay in the same episode about being mean to him, which leads me to believe that he's more in denial about how he's treated than truly unaware of how different he is from those two. Something interesting that I want to discuss in light of both N and Uzi's poor treatment by others is a study indicating that not only are neurotypical people able to often pick up on neurodivergent traits or differences, but that they are often less willing to engage with us socially because of these differences. This study obviously doesn't prove either character's neurodivergence, but rather is an interesting, if a bit sad, piece of information to consider as we speculate on these folks' neurotypes. Some posts I've seen have also cited his slight clumsiness and a scene where he looks at a pen in an interested way as evidence for N being neurodivergent, and I'm gonna be honest, you guys, I'm not too sure I would cite these, nor do I myself entirely read him as neurodivergent based on his social interactions either. But again, the most important thing is that if you're neurodivergent and you relate to N, I hear ya, and these things may very well be relevant to some neurodivergent people. Now, I hear some of you preemptively asking, but Haley, what about Sin? What about her? She's clearly neurodivergent, at least according to some people online that I've seen. And I want you to know that I deliberately didn't include Sin. And I swear to God, it wasn't laziness, it wasn't not wanting to investigate a third character, it wasn't because I had trouble putting a third character or imagining a third character in my thumbnail. I swear, I'm not really making a good case for myself, but I promise you guys. Rather, I don't feel like we ever actually got to know who Sin truly was, because for the entire time that we've known her, she's been possessed by the Solver. That said, if you want to fire away in the comments about your thoughts on Sin, be my guest. I am so not opposed to theories about her, so fire away. I'd be especially interested in hearing from other neurodivergent people about whether you agree or disagree about my assessment here. We are, after all, talking about fictional robots and are only going off of visible traits. We can't see inside these robots' minds or hard drives or whatever the hell is inside their heads. Still, I always love seeing some good neurodivergent representation, and boy, do we need it. And even though neither of these characters have been confirmed as canonically neurodivergent at the time of this writing, we can always relish in the idea of neurodivergent characters being portrayed in a positive way. Phew! Oh my god. Okay, well that was my first scripted video like ever, so I really hope you enjoyed it. I really hope to make a lot more of these in the future too. I honestly love Murder Drones, even though I do feel low-key stupid when I watch it, so you know, I may have to watch each episode a few times before I make more videos about it, but I will still nonetheless do that. And if you like mental health stuff along with indie animation, you best believe I will be making more content like that, so please stick around if you are interested in that. All right, guys, thank you so much, and I will see you soon. Bye!